Now, romantic comedies, which is a whole other subgenre of what we're talking about. That's a whole other beast. Yeah. In your opinion, what makes good romantic comedies work? Because when it's good, it's really good. You know, when Harry Met Sally, Sleepless in Seattle, Annie Hall, right. Those. I mean, when they work, they are just hitting on all pistons. But there's been a lot of bad ones too.
Well, I'm remembering. I can't remember the name, but they all have Katherine Hagel, and the guy from 300. What's
Gerard Butler.
Gerald Butler. They all feature Katherine Hagel and Gerald Butler, and I remember watching this movie, and about 15 minutes in, she's up a tree, spying on him, and I'm thinking, oh, that'll happen. Here's the problem with bad romantic comedy movies. They think that romantic comedy is about getting two people who are destined to be together. Mm-hmm. And then because they're destined to be together, you have to come up with ways of keeping them apart. Let's just come up with ways of keeping them apart. But that's not really the problem that people have in relationships. People don't have the problem of keeping you apart. The problem is, how do you stay together and not kill each other?
Yes, absolutely.
So the really good romantic comedies are, I guess I would put Sleepless in Seattle as an exception, mm-hmm. because that's really a romantic comedy in which two fated people who are apart figure out a way to get together.
Right.
But they start off on opposite ends of the country. You don't have to create an artificial obstacle to keep them apart. But movies like When Harry Met Sally,
Pretty Woman.
Pretty Woman. To me, that's not really a great example of the genre. I'm thinking more like 500 Days of Summer.
Yes.
Annie
Hall, of course.
Annie Hall. Even About a Boy, which is not a romantic comedy insofar as Hugh Grant is going to be romantically involved with that boy, but it is a romantic comedy because it's about him connecting with somebody else besides himself.
Or Notting Hill. That was another really
or Notting Hill.
That's a great one.
And it's all about not how do you overcome these artificial obstacles. It's how do you figure out how to stay together with the obstacles that are there to begin with. You're two different human beings. You have different DNA. Mm-hmm. Your molecules rotate and vibrate at different frequencies. Mm-hmm. The real problem in relationships is once we figure out how to swipe right and swipe left, is then when we meet, how do you stay together? I mean, because 50% of all marriages end in divorce. Mm-hmm. So staying together is not easy. You don't have to create an obstacle. You have to figure out, how do we stay together? How do we figure out how to be one in a pair as opposed to the one that we know? So that's what I think a good romantic comedy is. A good romantic comedy explores how we are in relationships and what we do in relationships and why we're so bad at relationships, as opposed to, well, these two people are just going to love each other unless we put some kind of wall between them. They're just going to break through that wall and rut like animals. No, no, they're, people have a hard time being in the same room with each other. How do you get past that?
I mean, When Harry Met Sally is a really great example of that.
Yeah.
And that whole exploration was, Nora Ephron was probably one of the geniuses in the genre, without question. And even Notting Hill, they have obstacles, but the obstacles are just what baggage they bring, each of them bring to the relationship. Julia Roberts is a movie star. He's a bookstore owner. how are we going to make this work? We love each other, but how are we going to stay together? And it's about how do we stay together?
Exactly. As opposed to how do we get them together? How do we keep them apart for 90 minutes?
Right.
One of the examples that I use in my workshops, when people ask me this question, I showed them a couple of scenes from Dan in Real Life, which was
Steve Carell. Yeah.
Steve Carell. And Dan in Real Life, Steve Carell's a widower. He's been depressed for 2 years. He meets this wonderful woman, Julia Binoche, in a bookstore, and they chat and they talk. And he goes back to, because they're having like a family reunion at this, unbelievable, perfect house with the perfect family and the perfect everything. And he goes back. And everybody can tell that he's kind of hepped up about something, and they say, what happened? He says, I might have met a girl. And then his brother, who's Dane Cook, and by the way, when you're in a movie and Dane Cook is out acting you're in trouble. I just want to say that. Dane Cook introduces his fiancée, and it turns out to be Julia Binoche from the bookstore. And at that moment, the movie goes wrong. At that moment, Steve Carell lies and says, oh, hi, what's your name? Okay, here's the result of that. Later on in the movie, about 40 minutes later, because they're trying to pretend that they don't know each other, he ends up fully clothed in a shower, pretending to take a shower. If your character ends up in a shower fully clothed, you've made a wrong turn. People don't do that. It doesn't happen in real life. Here's what would have been a better turn for them. She comes in the door, and he says, well, we actually know each other. Well, she's the girl I met in the bookstore. And she might be embarrassed for a second. Mm-hmm. And then he would say, no, but now I can see Dane Cook while you love her because she's great. Congratulations, my brother.
Right.
And so the movie becomes, how long can you fool yourself into thinking that you're happy for your brother as opposed to really wanting her for yourself? And that becomes, to my mind, a much more interesting movie than winding up in a shower fully clothed, getting wet. Because wouldn't it be funny if I had to hide? Why is he hiding? Why? So he's talking to his brother's fiancée. Why is he hiding in a shower and somebody turns the shower on? And
it's interesting because they a lot of times when I feel like when writers and directors and even actors and performers, when they don't have that hold on story structure or story or like what you're talking about
or character
exactly.
What would be believable for the character?
Right. They then automatically lean on slapstick. They lean on like, how can we get a gag out of here? Like, wouldn't it be funny?
Wouldn't it be funny if? There's a great story about the making of Groundhog Day. Mm-hmm. And in one of the earlier drafts in Groundhog Day, when he wakes up and it's the third day and it's the third time in a row, and is it really happening? Am I going crazy? And in the script, they have him shaving his head into a mohawk, destroying the room, setting fire to half the room, painting the other room in Day-Clo colors. He goes to sleep, 6 o'clock, Sonny and Cher are on the radio. He wakes up the same day. And they looked at those rushes, and Harold Ramis and I'm guessing Bill Murray or the producers looked at each other and said, why would he cut his hair into a mohawk? Why would he do that?
I mean, visually it's funny, but it doesn't work.
How does it help?
It doesn't help.
Right. Why would this character do that? And so at great expense, they reshot the scene. And all that happens in the scene, if you remember, is he breaks a pencil. Right. He puts one down on the floor and he puts one on the nightstand, and he wakes up the next morning and the pencil is whole and he knows it's happening.
Right. And it's so brilliantly simple.
Simple, honest, and direct, as opposed to wouldn't it be funny if? And from that point on, and Steve Tobolowsky, who has his own podcast, relates that that from that moment on, the question always was, what would they really do? What would really happen? In fact, at the end of Groundhog Day, there was this whole debate because Andy McDowell wins him in the Bachelor auction and takes him home. And there was this whole debate on how the last scene should go. Did they have sex? What happened? Would he wake up like naked? Would he wake up? And they rather than thinking, well, wouldn't it be funny if we do this? They put it to a vote. The entire cast and crew got to vote on what would happen that night. What would happen with these two characters? Because they were no longer fictional characters. They were real. They were human beings. And what would these two human beings do? And that's why, spoiler, at the next day, it turns out that all he did was fall asleep. And Andy McDowell says, "You just fell asleep." And he says, "It was the end of a really long day."
It's just so brilliant.
It's brilliant.
It's so brilliant. And the song is different when it pops on.
Exactly.
It was great. Oh, I gotta watch that movie again. It was so great.